Yo, what's up YouTube? We're back with another video. Today we're going to be discussing the new tech update added to HD2. We got DLSS, XCSS, and FSR added to Helldivers. These are anti-aliasing solutions, but also resolution scaling. So you could potentially get some new performance, but it's mostly seems like aimed at improving TA's implementation of anti-aliasing, which is the jaggy, like shimmering effect that you can sometimes get on edges, but also the overall clarity of the game, because TA has been quite blurry for some time in HD2. So really welcome to see it here. But I'm going to be going over the settings, best settings to have, and how to get your settings to show up, because a lot of people have been having that issue. So starting with that, if you are on PC and you have been playing for some time, there's a very good chance that you put in a launch command to force the game in DirectX 11. Delete that. If you don't have that in, you will see the settings. If you have that launch command in, you will not see the settings, only TAA. So it seems like DirectX 11 version of the game has not been updated, only DirectX 12. Second point though, because I know this has been coming up a lot on stream, have they improved the performance of DirectX 11 versus 12? And I'll be happy to say that like the differences between DirectX 11 and 12 is mostly just your high-end FPS. Most people, when they report I get more FPS when I use DirectX 11, are talking about when they're in their ship or running around on a map or on a planet and nothing's going on. So your maximum FPS will be higher. But when stuff is happening on the planet in game, DirectX 11 and 12 stay pretty level-headed with one another. So I gotta say, at this point in time in HD2, you don't really need to be in DirectX 11 to gain more FPS. But if you love seeing your average FPS and your, high end of FPS just being higher, maybe just stick with TAA and DirectX 11 if that's what you care about. So getting into our settings menu, it is under display. You'll notice a bunch of fancy new options, including render display. I'm going to set it up to where it'll look like by default. By default, it should be like this. All right. So when you first come in, it'll be TAs on with dynamic resolution scaling and so on and so forth. These are all new implementations. So you're probably going to want to swap to DLSS if you have a NVIDIA graphics card, or XCSS if you have an AMD or Intel graphics card. You'll be like, why are you not using FSR? FSR 3 is just not as good of a setting or a resolution scaler as XCSS. It's been updated more often. Now, for those who have newer AMD graphics cards like the 9070 XT or 9070, you can potentially force FSR 4 in this case, which would look better than XCSS, hopefully. So set your anti-aliasing accordingly, depending on what graphics card you have. If you want more granular support on what resolution the internal resolution will be, you turn off dynamic resolution scaling, so you have access to the resolution scale, the rendering scale. Native will be 1-to-1 with whatever resolution you have. So if you're at 1080p, it'll be rendering at 1080p, and then it will do the anti-aliasing on top of it. If you're at 1440p, it'll be 1440p. If you turn down a quality, it'll be one step lower. So I believe for like 1080p, it goes down to like 900p. For 1440p, it'll go down to like 1080p, right? So it just goes one step lower, and then it upscales up to that original, but with some caveats and artifacting, right? If you're at 1080p, I would not go below quality. If you're at 1440p, I would not go below balanced. And if I was at 4K, I would not go below performance. All right. I've been mostly messing with native and quality. I play 1440p. The next thing we got to talk about is dynamic resolution scaling. This is basically you set an FPS target. So let's say I love playing my game at 90 FPS. What it will try and do, it will dynamically change your internal resolution, all upscaling, to try and meet that target, right? So it's essentially like a minimum FPS. In theory, this is great because it'll keep your render resolution really high when nothing's happening, when you're just walking around your ship and stuff like that. But let's say you're on planet and you're shooting a bunch of bugs and so on and so forth. It will lower the resolution at that time to maintain a high fluidity of gameplay. Your average FPS will stay the same rather than it dropping a lot. This is great for people who are not pixel peaking, while they are shooting bugs, for instance. This can be very noticeable if you put this too high though. If you put it at like 150, it'll lower your render resolution scale really low to constantly maintain that very high amount. But if you're pretty moderate and you're asking for pretty reasonable FPS all the time, it wouldn't be noticeable, and it actually would be very effective at keeping your FPS very level, right? Because if you turn this off and you just go with a setting, let's say, quality, you will have your highs and you'll have your lows, and the game will feel less smooth when you're at your lows. Dynamic resolution scaling is just trying to bring up your lows to a certain point where you choose. Pretty cool setting, but your mileage may vary. It's on by default, which would be useful for some people, but some people just absolutely hate the setting. So yeah. The next one to talk about is variable rate shading. More or less, this is a performance setting for people with lower end graphics cards that might be more VRAM constrained, or just in general, they want more performance. If I go from off to performance, you know, I normally notice maybe a 5 to 8 FPS gain. For me, that's usually sitting at like 90 to 100 in ship. On planet, it's maybe a little bit more. But the problem with this setting is that you will see more artifacting, especially if you have DLSS on. Like one that was very noticeable to me immediately was mines. Their lights will start to flicker and have some texture issues in general. So if you're looking for some free FPS and you're not really paying attention too much to how the game looks, variable rate shading is a fairly good option to go with, especially since you have some amount of granularity here. You can, you know, maybe turn it to quality, not as much of a performance gain, but it's not noticeable as much. Personally, I'm keeping it off, but your mileage may vary. NVIDIA, low latency, and I think there's anti-lag as well for AMD users. It's just a great one to have on. I would at least recommend having it on just because it improves latency. So when you're moving your character around, it won't feel as laggy. On plus boost basically just make sure that your GPU is boosting while you're playing the game and it's not being in more of like a power saving mode, which is beneficial. But overall, my personal settings are quality, DLSS, dynamic resolution scaling off. And the last setting that I forgot to mention, that I got to mention here, because a lot of people are going to be like, when I turn on DLSS, it looks all blurry. Make sure you go to your graphics settings and adjust your sharpness. If you're aiming more for DLAA, maybe don't have as much sharpness, because there is such thing as too much sharpness. It can create artifacts of its own and can cause aliasing and so on and so forth, even with anti-aliasing. So finding the right setting for you is important. I'm pretty sure by default it's at 0, so it can make the image look very blurry. But, you know, depending on DLSS or FSR, XeSS, this value will be different. But for me at 1440p with quality preset DLSS, I'm finding that 0.75 to 0.85 really good. You know, it's a good mixture of not too sharp, so things aren't aliasing, but not too blurry that, you know, it looks crap. So give it a try. Hope this helped. I have noticed one thing though, while playing HD2 after the update, my overall GPU usage is not hitting 100%. Not quite sure what's exactly going on there. It's not exactly like I'm in a CPU bottleneck or anything like that at the moment. This might just be because we haven't had a NVIDIA driver tied to HD2 for this new update. So maybe there's just some driver conflicts. I don't know. Maybe the devs will comment on it, but keep that in mind that this is just the first implementation of it. And when I did have a conversation with Shams, the CEO of Arrowhead, when he came by the stream, he did say that they are having conversations about frame gen. So we'll see if we get it in the future. For anyone that's like a big tinkerer of, you know, AMD or NVIDIA and so on and so forth. At the moment in the NVIDIA app, you cannot override the settings. It's just unsupported. Apparently in DLSS Swapper, you can't enable frame gen, but you can mess around with different DLSS models. So if you like DLSS, but you find this particular model, which is 4.5, to be too heavy, because if by enabling DLSS, you do lose some FPS, you can swap around the models with DLSS Swapper. Just give it a Google. You'll find it. It's a third-party program. But it would be nice that if we got a driver update for HD2, so we can start messing around with these and potentially even turn on frame gen without them officially turning it on in-game. Be really nice. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Nice, short, and sweet. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'll be playing HD2 in the morning. I usually start around 3 a.m. EST and go to about 9 a.m. EST. We are playing some 007 on stream, so if you come in and see me playing that, don't worry, you can still ask me HD2 questions. But yeah, come on by. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thanks for watching. Comment, like, subscribe. Bye, YouTube.